I was grabbing coffee with an old friend last week. Let's call him Mark. And for years, Mark was, the quintessential student of the game.
Right.
He'd spent a fortune on tailored suits, obsessed over his opening lines, and he tracked his dating app matches with the cold precision of a high-frequency trader. He had the physique, the six-figure salary, and the calculated charisma that the whole offensive red pill manual promises will, unlock the world.
Everything by the book.
Everything. By every traditional metric, he was a man who had finally mastered the external market. But as we sat there, I noticed something jarring. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't scanning the room for targets. In fact, he seemed almost unnervingly still. So when I asked him how the hunt was going, he just gave me this look of calm, detached exhaustion. He said, "I deleted the apps, man. I'm done casting nets into a behavioral sink. The ROI just hit 0.
Wow. Not the response you'd expect.
Not at all. I expected him to sound bitter or, defeated, the typical profile of someone who's given up. But he didn't. He looked sharper, more energized, and more focused than I'd ever seen him during his years of active pursuit.
So what changed?
He started explaining his new routine, a rigorous monk mode. We're talking high-leverage capital accumulation, physiological optimization, and a total blackout of social media validation. He wasn't retreating because he couldn't win the game. He was withdrawing because he'd realized the game itself was a liquidity trap designed to deplete his survival redundancy.
That's a very specific, almost economic way of putting it.
It was. He told me his voice was just devoid of any heat. It's not about catching the fish anymore. It's about owning the pond. I've moved from the role of the fisherman to the role of the sovereign.
And that's the core of what we're talking about today.
Exactly. That instantaneous shift from a man obsessed with his market value to a man focused entirely on his internal jurisdiction is becoming this silent epidemic among the modern male elite. It's a phenomenon known as the soft red pill.
A radical evolutionary pivot away from external conquest and toward a cold, strategic inward turn.
So the question for this deep dive is, why are the most capable men suddenly deciding that the only way to win a rigged game is to stop playing it entirely? And what happens to a society when its fishers decide to become sovereigns? To understand that, I think we have to look at the amoral logic of survival in a world that has, reached its breaking point.
That opening narrative really grounds us perfectly. Because this isn't about failure, which is, like you said, the easy assumption.
Right.
This is a deep dive into strategic withdrawal, a calculated pivot based on a very cold assessment of the current social environment.
So we have this massive shift in focus. The soft red pill, or SRP, is fundamentally about changing the metaphorical role one occupies. But for you, what is the key distinction between the mindset of the fisherman and that of the sovereign?
The distinction is all about the source of authority and value. The fisherman is defined by his continuous high-effort participation in external markets.
Always casting the net.
Always. He's perpetually casting nets into these turbulent, competitive external waters. The dating market, the validation economy, the prestige race. His sense of self-worth and success is entirely external, dictated by conquest and by metrics he just doesn't control.
Okay, so then the sovereign is the opposite of that.
The sovereign recognizes that external pursuit is incredibly costly and often futile. So he turns his focus entirely inward toward the governance of his own domain, his finances, his health, his intellectual life, his schedule. It's a profound move from seeking conquest of the external world to establishing absolute jurisdiction over the internal self.
And the main tool for this is strategic withdrawal.
It's the core mechanism. It's the calculated act of removing yourself from markets that yield diminishing returns. And that requires us to first really examine why those external markets are failing in the first place.
I think that's crucial. You mentioned diminishing returns. Mark, my friend, he spent years on that offensive red pill strategy, aggressive, competitive, focused on maximizing external appeal. But he found the investment just wasn't paying off anymore. Why is the modern dating market, specifically the digital one, such a rational failure for the average high-effort guy?
Well, the failure is rooted in some fundamental economic asymmetry and hyper-competition. We can characterize the external digital market as a deregulated zero-sum arena where the average participant sees his return on investment.
The ROI, yeah.
The money spent on the gym, clothes, emotional capital, all of it is plummeting towards zero. And the primary economic mechanism driving this collapse is the inflation of mate selection criteria.
Okay, what does that inflation look like in practice? Give us a concrete example of this hyperinflation.
Sure. Historically, if a man achieved, say, stability, had a decent job, and was physically fit, He met the criteria for entry and selection.
He was in the game.
He was in the game.
Yeah.
Today, because of the illusion of near infinite choice that you get on digital platforms, those selection criteria have become hyperinflated. It was once aspirational, a man over 6 feet tall with a six-figure income and a dedicated fitness routine is often treated as the absolute baseline requirement for entry into the top tier of attention.
The baseline, not the goal.
Exactly. When the supply of potential partners appears boundless, the screening mechanisms become prohibitively harsh. This leads to a saturation of signals without any actual structural access for most men. The goalposts just keep moving, and the cost of staying in the game continually rises.
So even if you achieve, say, the 90th percentile of traditional success, the competition pool is so deep and the available attention is so concentrated at the very, very top that your marginal effort yields almost nothing. You're pouring time and emotion into a system that is basically designed to ignore you.
That's it, precisely. And this environment is not benign. This intense zero-sum competition, coupled with the profound isolation inherent in disconnected metropolitan environments, what we call the behavioral sink, doesn't just waste resources, it actively consumes the individual's most critical resource.
And that is survival redundancy.
Yes.
Okay, let's drill down into that term, behavioral sink. It's heavy, it's sociological jargon. Can you help us understand its origin and how it applies here?
Of course. The term behavioral sink comes from these famous, or maybe infamous, experiments conducted by an ethologist, John B. Calhoun, back in the 1960s. Specifically his Universe 25 studies.
Right, the mouse utopia experiments.
That's the one. Calhoun created this perfect enclosed environment for mice. They had limitless food, limitless water, so he effectively eliminated all external pressures except for one: density.
Too many inhabitants in a small space.
Precisely. And as the population grew, the social environment just collapsed. Instead of forming stable communities, the mice succumbed to all these pathological behaviors. Hyperaggression, extreme withdrawal, a total breakdown of social roles, including parental roles. And ultimately, it led to complete social atomization and infertility.
A paradise that became a hell because of overcrowding.
The environment of constant, unavoidable social competition and interaction, despite abundant resources, it became toxic.
So when we apply this concept to modern urban and digital dating life, the constant social signaling, the high density of participants on apps, the endless pursuit of external validation, even with resources available, it creates a psychological environment that mirrors that behavioral sink.
That's the link. Modern life eliminates most physical threats, but replaces them with chronic, low-grade, high-density social threats. Constant comparison, intense competitive pressure, and the need to maintain an exhausting online persona. This environment creates a psychological and emotional depletion where the individual is always running down their reserves.
Which brings us back to survival redundancy.
Yes.
We introduced it as a concept from complex systems theory, the buffer you need for unexpected shocks. How does the behavioral sink actively deplete it?
Survival redundancy is that crucial buffer of non-allocated resources. Your time, your emotional energy, your psychological resilience, and your uncommitted money that allow an organism or a complex system to absorb and recover from unexpected shocks.
Right, the emergency fund for your life.
A great way to put it. When an individual pours all their emotional and financial capital into this high-stress, low-return system of hyper-competition, they are running on fumes. They have zero redundancy left when a real crisis hits. A job loss, a serious health scare, or an unexpected financial market downturn.
And the SRP identifies this constant depletion as a primary existential threat.
It does. Strategic withdrawal, therefore, becomes a form of radical resource conservation. It is the rational move to rebuild that buffer.
That reframes the whole decision. It's less emotional and more like an engineer deciding to pull the plug on a dangerously inefficient system to prevent a total meltdown. It's just pure resource management.
Exactly.
So if we look at this through the lens of evolutionary biology, how is this withdrawal framed as a cold, amoral survival algorithm?
We have to strip this discipline of any moralistic component. It's not about being good or bad. It's pure, functional, evolutionary calculation. We can reference Robert Triver's seminal work on parental investment theory. The theory posits that organisms will allocate their finite energy and resources toward strategies that yield the optimal expected value for genetic continuity.
And traditionally, that optimal strategy has always been aggressive external conquest, the Fisherman model.
Correct. For most of history, that worked. But when the external mating games become prohibitively high cost, and the probability of a successful, stable outcome, like a high-quality long-term mate, becomes very low due to the hyper-competition and criteria inflation we discussed, the evolutionary algorithm flips.
The old strategy is no longer optimal.
It's a net loss. The optimal strategy is no longer aggressive conquest or the offensive red pill.
Instead, that energy gets diverted inward.
Exactly. The optimal expected value shifts dramatically to investing that finite resource in long-term asset accumulation. This means building financial capital, acquiring rare and valuable skills, and relentlessly enhancing physical vitality, what the sources summarize simply as making money and fitness.
So the body and the mind, in their deepest wiring, they recognize the environmental toxicity and basically say, current reproductive risks outweigh the immediate rewards. Therefore, we initiate a deep resource conservation effort and build an internal sanctuary.
That's the amoral logic. And in this context, asceticism, the self-denial involved in something like monk mode, is not pursued as a virtue. It's a functional tool. It serves as a circuit breaker, disconnecting the individual from the modern trap of instant dopamine feedback loops like social media or low-value consumption and all the informational toxicity. This rewiring is purely about maximizing long-term resilience and competence, which, ironically, inevitably makes the individual a higher value proposition later on, independent of the immediate mating pressures.
I find it fascinating that this deep personal decision can be mapped onto a formal game theory model. Let's look at the exit voice loyalty model, or EVL, to sociologically map the SRP's decision process. This model is often used in political science, right? But how does it apply here?
The EVL model provides a really structured, rational framework. In this analogy, the citizen is the individual participating in the dating market. The government is the environment itself, the social contract, the dating market dynamics, the media narrative, which has implemented a perceived negative change.
And that negative change is the high costs, low returns, and criteria inflation.
Exactly. So the citizen faces three rational choices when hit with this negative change.
Okay, what are they?
First is loyalty. That means choosing to put up with the new negative status quo and not altering your behavior. You just accept the loss, take a payoff close to zero, or even a negative one.
Just keep playing the losing game.
The second is voice. This means making an active effort to express dissatisfaction and try to change the system, aggressively competing, campaigning for change, or complaining loudly. This strategy incurs a defined cost, which we'll call C.
And the third option?
Finally, there's exit. This is accepting the loss of the benefit and altering your behavior and allocation of assets to achieve the best possible alternative payoff, which we'll call E.
The SRP decision to go monk mode is clearly a calculated exit, but that aggressive offensive red pill approach, that would be classified as voice. So why is exit the rational dominant strategy instead of just bearing the cost C for the voice effort?
This is where we have to define the variables in context. First, let's define the cost of voice, C, in the context of the external market. It's not just the time spent swiping.
Right.
The cost T includes the emotional labor of constant validation seeking, the stress and anxiety of rejection, the financial outlay on tailored outfits or lifestyle upgrades that still don't yield results, and the mental fatigue of keeping up with an endless stream of social signaling. This cost C is extremely high, and it's rapidly depleting that survival redundancy we talked about.
And the rational individual is comparing that high cost C against the potential payoff of exit E.
Precisely. The individual will only choose voice if they believe two things. First, that the payoff from a successful response is worth the cost C, and second, that the government, the social environment or market, is likely to respond to their dissatisfaction. This is the crucial variable, the market's dependence on the citizen's loyalty. Let's call it L.
In the current scenario, where the dating market is hypersaturated with participants, is the government dependent on any single average man's participation?
No, it's perceived as overwhelmingly autonomous. The digital dating market, the social media ecosystem, the wider culture, they are not dependent on the loyalty and support of any single average man. The supply of male participation is just too high. Therefore, the value of the citizen's loyalty, L, is low. It's less than 1.
Which means the market will simply choose to ignore the voice strategy.
Precisely. The rational sequence dictates that if the citizen chooses voice, which is aggressive competition, the autonomous market will ignore the effort. So the individual has paid the high cost C for absolutely nothing. At that point, the choice is between two negative payoffs. Either exit, resulting in a net payoff of EC, or remaining loyal, resulting in a net payoff of 0C.
So since the cost C is already sunk and high, the rational choice is exit.
As long as the alternative payoff E, the value gained from reallocating your resources, is greater than bearing the original cost C.
That is powerful. It takes the subjective pain of exhaustion and disappointment and converts it into a clean mathematical decision tree. Exit is the most rational choice because the system is autonomous and high cost, and efforts to change it are futile. That logic, which mathematically proves why leaving the game is rational, forces us to ask, what do you do after you've exited? That cold, hard decision leads us directly to the practical vehicle for resource reallocation. Monk mode.
Monk mode is the tactical execution of that strategic EVL exit decision.
Yeah.
It's the practical vehicle for the SRP pivot. It's defined as a temporary practice of radical self-isolation and the elimination of all non-essential distractions, specifically to achieve high-leverage goals faster. It truly is a self-development cocoon.
Mark described it as a total blackout. So this isn't just about reducing dating app use. It's a profound, disciplined effort. What are the typical non-negotiable eliminations that define this state?
Well, the practice necessitates a radical reduction of informational and social noise to achieve maximum psychological and temporal capital. Key eliminations include high dopamine, low ROI activities, social media, which cuts off the external validation loop that dictates self-esteem.
The validation seeking, yeah.
Then there's the 24-hour news cycle, eliminating the habit of feasting on outrage, fear, and human tragedy. All forms of passive entertainment like streaming and video games, which are just escapes to virtual worlds. And excessive low-value socializing like gossip and low-energy chatter. And of course, all dating apps and active dating efforts.
The objective isn't just time-saving, it seems. It's about creating a psychological vacuum, forcing the mind to focus inward instead of just consuming external stimuli. What's the core objective of generating that vacuum?
The core objective is twofold. First, to eliminate that pervasive external noise and break modern dopamine addiction patterns. And second, to immediately reinvest that freed mental and physical capital into high-leverage goals. This includes deep skill acquisition, like learning a high-value trade or a programming language, achieving specific financial objectives, like launching a side business or clearing debt, or reaching dramatic physiological milestones.
And it's all supported by pretty strict health rules, I imagine.
Absolutely. No junk food, no alcohol, regular sleep, and mandatory exercise, all to ensure maximum cognitive and physiological function during the sprint.
The rigor of monk mode suggests that the goal is deeper than just efficiency. It's about establishing that internal sovereignty that Mark spoke about. How does this intense self-isolation and discipline connect to classical philosophy, specifically the Stoicism that underpins psychological sovereignty?
Monk mode is the modern tactical application of ancient Stoic philosophy. It's specifically aimed at establishing a robust internal locus of control. The individual shifts their focus entirely away from external outcomes, whether they are chosen, whether the market is fair, whether they receive validation, and toward their own judgments and actions. They are disengaging from the game of being chosen, which inherently leaves you psychologically vulnerable to the external world.
This quest for internal control requires achieving that famous Stoic state, apatheia or indifference. But as you noted, we have to clarify that this does not mean emotional numbness. What exactly is apatheia in this context?
This is a vital philosophical distinction that is so often lost. Stoicism recognized that humans are affective beings and feelings are natural. But they distinguish between appropriate emotional responses, which they call eupathei, which are guided by reason, and destructive passions, or pathei, which arise from irrational, incorrect judgments.
So if you interpret rejection as, say, an objective, devastating evil, the resulting shame and rage are pathei.
Exactly. So apatheia isn't about killing the feeling. It's about regulating the reaction.
Emotional regulation guided by reason.
Precisely. It's the clarity of mind that allows the individual to prevent an automatic, painful reaction like intense infatuation or the pain of rejection from escalating into a consuming, destructive passion that hijacks their productivity and focus. You're creating psychological distance between the stimulus and the response, reinforcing that internal jurisdiction.
Let's detail the actionable psychological techniques being used in monk mode, derived directly from that Stoic toolkit that allow for this psychological distance.
The bedrock rests on 3 techniques. The first is cognitive distancing or reappraisal. This requires the individual to deliberately step back from immediate, often highly charged emotional impressions and assess them rationally.
So when the impulse to check social media for validation hits, or when rejection sends a wave of self-doubt,
You ask, often in a structured way, Is this impression true? Is this thought helpful? And most importantly, is this outcome truly within my sphere of control?
That pause is everything. It interrupts the automated feedback loop. What about the second tool? That's more about accepting the reality outside your sphere of control, right?
That is acceptance, exemplified by the phrase Amor Fati, or love of fate. Now, this doesn't mean passively submitting, but actively accepting external events beyond your control, like the unfairness of the mating market, the inevitability of rejection, or even systemic social decline.
That sounds a lot like modern therapeutic concepts.
It does. It aligns with modern techniques like dialectical behavior therapy's radical acceptance, acknowledging reality as it is without fighting it emotionally. By radically accepting the uncontrollable external environment, you free up 100% of your energy for vigorous effort in the one sphere you can control: your own actions, judgments, and internal state.
And the third tool is an active discipline. It's like the accountability system for the inner sovereign.
That's the practice of Stoic journaling. This is not simply venting your thoughts. It's a structured daily introspection practice derived from Pythagorean methods and adopted by figures like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca. The process involves reviewing the day using 3 key, highly specific questions before you sleep.
Which are?
First, what did I do wrong today and how did my judgments betray me? Second, what did I do right today? Where did I exercise virtue? And third, what remains to be done, or what principles must I apply tomorrow? This discipline tracks your progress in emotional resilience. It forces self-awareness by illuminating unconscious patterns, and it reinforces the deliberate application of philosophical principles to every corner of your daily life.
Let's apply this to the pain Mark experienced. That cycle of infatuation followed by crushing rejection, something we see all the time in online forums. How does Stoicism apply to the pain of dating itself?
Well, the SRP acknowledges that the pain of loneliness, rejection, and infatuation is natural. It's part of the human affective experience, and it cannot, and probably shouldn't, be eradicated. Stoicism's function here is purely utilitarian. It's about redirecting that intense emotional energy.
So you feel the sting, but you use it.
Exactly. It advises putting maximum energy into controllable actions, working on your business, following your rigorous monk mode schedule, hitting new fitness goals, and accepting that the outcome of any specific interaction, like whether the other person is interested or decides to text back or chooses to leave, is entirely uncontrollable and therefore irrelevant to your internal value.
The ultimate control is over the effort, but not the result.
Precisely. The goal is to be open to an experience, meaning if a genuine, high-quality connection happens naturally while you are pursuing your sovereignty, you allow it. But you must not actively seek that connection as a guaranteed prize for your efforts. By disconnecting self-worth and emotional stability from the expectation of a specific external outcome, you maintain your psychological equilibrium. The rejection might sting, but it doesn't destabilize your entire structure.
Okay, so monk mode and Stoic principles are the tools, but they're used to build a new, formidable structure of self. The SRP philosophy details 3 core interlocking pillars that define this sovereign state. Let's start with the foundational one: financial sovereignty.
This is non-negotiable for self-determination. Financial sovereignty is defined as accumulating sufficient capital, not merely for status or luxury consumption, but explicitly to build deep existential security and maximum option generation. The individual aims to reach a position where their choices are not dictated by financial duress or the immediate need to secure a paycheck.
You used a provocative phrase earlier, countering consumerist castration. This needs a deeper explanation. What does that phrase mean in the context of sovereignty?
That phrase speaks to how modern society enforces compliance and minimizes individual agency through economic dependence. Consumerism, which is fueled by debt and high-cost lifestyle expectations, effectively forces the individual into a perpetual state of labor dependency.
You're always working to pay something off.
You must remain compliant, loyal, using that EVL term, and predictable because you are constantly leveraged. Consumerist castration means that the dependence on debt or lifestyle upkeep prevents you from taking radical career risks, from changing locations, or from stepping out of the prescribed economic system.
By accumulating an ample financial buffer, the SRP individual counters this forced compliance and grants themselves a higher degree of self-determination and existential freedom. Money becomes a shield against external coercion, not just a status symbol.
So financial independence enables psychological independence. What about the second domain, the physical structure of the self? The second pillar is physiological sovereignty. This is about optimizing the body's functional hardware through rigorous physical training. This focus is aimed at elevating vitality and counteracting the stress-induced decline and lethargy that are so common in sedentary modern life.
And exercise, specifically resistance training, is key here.
It's viewed as a non-negotiable lever for hormonal health, mental clarity, and high performance. Physical mastery, the discipline, and the tangible results of improving your own fitness serves as immediate, undeniable proof of internal control. It reinforces the psychological shift away from external metrics.
You build the body that reflects the discipline you impose on your mind. And third pillar, tying back to our philosophical discussion, psychological sovereignty.
This is the governance of the mind itself. It is the conscious, continuous refusal to surrender your cognitive and affective states to emotional arenas defined by external, often gynocentric or hyperpolitical narratives you find in media and popular culture.
So it's about building a kind of mental firewall.
It is. It's achieving functional insulation from informational toxicity. It means the sovereign mind dictates its own priorities, assesses inputs based on reason, and controls its emotional responses, independent of external cultural or social pressure. You choose what thoughts you entertain, what narratives you adopt, and what sources of information you allow into your domain.
This systematic construction, financial, physiological, and psychological, is designed to make the individual not merely robust, but anti-fragile. Let's spend some time on this term, anti-fragility, because it's a concept that is often used, I think, pretty loosely.
It is. Anti-fragility is a concept drawn from complexity science and chaos theory, and it goes far beyond robustness. If something is fragile, shocks break it, like a glass vase. If something is robust, shocks pass through it and leave it unchanged, like a rubber ball. But anti-fragility means the individual system is specifically designed to benefit from volatility, disorder, and pressure.
How does that apply to the sovereign?
The SRP individual trains himself to use setbacks, rejection, financial turbulence, criticism, market failure, to trigger a positive internal response, forging greater capacity and competence. Think of it like a weightlifter. The act of lifting a heavy weight, the shock or the pressure, isn't benign. It causes micro tears in the muscle.
Right.
But the body, in response, heals those tears by building stronger, denser tissue. The sovereign uses the world's chaos, the volatility of the dating market, the pressure of competitive employment, as a free source of personal development fuel. The shock doesn't just pass through them, it makes them demonstrably stronger for the next challenge.
That explains the long-term benefit, but let's go back to the high-leverage benefits of the monk mode sprint itself. The claim is that milestones are accelerated dramatically. How does that total focus actually achieve this?
It relies on the immense power of accumulation and compounding. Consider a day where you have 10 units of mental energy. On a normal, distracted day, only 2 or 3 units might go toward your most important, complex life goal. The rest is diffused across emails, social media, small errands, and low-value consumption.
Just frittered away.
In the focused environment of monk mode, that allocation flips. You dedicate 8 or 9 of those daily energy units to your single most important objective.
You are stacking focused time.
Exactly. This focused application means the power of accumulation kicks in dramatically. Instead of accumulating, say, 20 hours of deep work a month, you're accumulating 80 or 100 hours of deep work. Milestones like launching a specific business, getting a certification, or achieving a certain physique that would normally take 9 months to a year can often be achieved in a focused sprint of 2 to 4 months.
It's an unsustainable pace long-term, though.
Of course. But for a focused sprint to establish a new foundational level of competence, it is highly leveraged, and it justifies the radical sacrifice of social life and immediate pleasure.
So we've tracked the individual internal transformation. Now let's step back. What is the macro-level impact when thousands of capable individuals make this same decision to strategically exit and focus inward?
When this individual retreat aggregates across a population, it translates into a form of collective nonviolent non-cooperation. It is essentially a soft decoupling from a social contract that is perceived as exploitative or decadent. These individuals aren't protesting actively. They are simply withdrawing their engagement, their loyalty, their financial resources, and their emotional investment from the mainstream systems, consumerism, celebrity culture, and the mating markets.
That's fascinating. It's a political act executed purely at the level of individual conduct.
It is. Their focus is purely on maintaining individual functional integrity. While the language used in these circles can sometimes be provocative, the underlying pursuit is a kind of civilianized pursuit of the Übermensch ideal. The focus is on channeling competence, resilience, and personal sovereignty. The romantic and material outcomes are byproducts of this foundational power, never the primary objective.
So it's self-preservation, and the establishment of autonomy in the face of perceived instability, leading to this silent, collective walkout.
Exactly.
The soft red pill strategy involves intense, prolonged isolation, this monk mode sprint. This immediately forces us to address a crucial sociological counterpoint, which is the Japanese phenomenon of severe pathological social withdrawal known as hikikomori. Since both involve deep voluntary isolation, how do we confidently distinguish between the SRP's rational strategy and what looks like a pathological state?
The distinction is absolutely vital as it highlights the functional nature of the SRP versus the debilitating nature of hikikomori. Hikikomori, which means pulling inward, being confined, describes reclusive adolescents or adults who retreat from social life for a continuous duration of at least 6 months. And critically, this leads to significant functional impairment and social isolation.
And the scale in Japan is staggering. This suggests a deep societal problem, not just individual neurosis.
That's right. Estimates suggest over 1 million individuals in Japan are affected. And what's worse, the population is aging, leading to the serious 80-50 problem, where elderly parents in their 80s are caring for their hikikomori children who are often in their 50s.
That's terrifying.
It is. The psychological profile is defined by severe confinement, often to a single room total avoidance of social interaction and profound psychological distress, including shame, apathy, depression, and a complete loss of motivation. And while high male prevalence exists, some studies report up to 80% are men, the underlying motivation is fundamentally different from the SRP.
Let's zoom in on those root cause differences. The SRP is driven by a rational calculation of market ROI and a desire for personal strength. What drives the hikikomori state?
Well, hikikomori is triggered not by strategic choice, but by a collapse due to overwhelming external pressure intersecting with specific cultural and familial structures. Societally, the rigorous, highly competitive Japanese educational system imposes immense pressure, often instilling a paralyzing fear of failure. When you couple that with the post-1990s decline of lifetime employment, job insecurity becomes a massive stressor.
So intense external pressures lead to a kind of internal surrender.
Exactly. And familial dynamics are also highly significant. There's a common pattern involving highly codependent mother-child relationships, often exacerbated by cultural expectation of the desire for indulgent dependency. When the individual fails to meet that high external standard, their deep fear of shame and failure in a conformist society drives them into total withdrawal.
And the family can enable it.
Crucially, the family, often attempting to hide the shame, inadvertently enables the withdrawal by providing all the individual's basic needs: food, shelter, internet access, creating a functional hikikomori system. The isolation is maintained by fear, shame, and enabled dependency.
That contrasts so sharply with the SRP, where the individual is withdrawing dependency and actively increasing self-reliance.
That is the key distinction. The SRP withdrawal is defined by the strategic, proactive pursuit of internal power, competence, and measurable goals. It is a functional, forward-looking sprint designed to increase market value later. The individual is intentionally putting themselves under more pressure, not less.
Whereas
Hikikomori, by contrast, is characterized by arrested development, profound feelings of inadequacy, and a debilitating loss of connection with the future. The isolation is a retreat from the present rather than preparation for the future.
While the phenomenon originated in Japan, we see hikikomori-like cases popping up in other industrialized nations like South Korea, Europe, and North America. Does this suggest the SRP movement and hikikomori are two sides of the same coin, a universal human response to modern pressure?
It suggests they are both responses to shared environmental stressors: academic pressure, employment insecurity, and the hypersocial environment mediated by technology. However, the response is polarized. One path, the SRP, represents a decision to adapt through hypercompetence and aggressive self-reliance, a functional adaptation. The other, hikikomori, represents a collapse into paralysis and dependency, a pathological response. The culture dictates the expression, but the core distinction remains. One isolates to build, the other isolates out of fear of failure.
We've established that the SRP is a strategic movement, but it shares vocabulary with the broader manosphere: MGTOW, incels, PUAs, this whole red pill constellation. One unifying thread across all these groups is their reliance on and intense fondness for evolutionary psychology, or EP. Why is EP so frequently invoked in these communities?
EP is extremely popular because its scientific clout provides a powerful token of authority and a veneer of objective truth. It attempts to map a seemingly cold, antagonistic Darwinian framework onto contemporary gender and relationship dynamics. This provides a biological justification, an absolute truth, for their worldview, which is often one that is inherently critical of feminism and modern social structures.
The problem is that the findings are routinely misused.
Distorted and applied with massive ideological bias, yes.
Let's focus on the most popular example, the dual mating strategy hypothesis, DMSH. What does this hypothesis actually suggest in the scientific literature, and how is that science then weaponized in manosphere discourse?
The DMSH is a highly complex hypothesis within EP. It suggests that women may have evolved adaptations to pursue a dual strategy, securing long-term investment and provisioning from one reliable, stable partner, while simultaneously engaging in discrete extra-pair mating with the genetically superior or higher vitality male to obtain fitter genes for their offspring. The hypothesis focuses on ultimate unconscious drives related to reproductive success.
And in online discourse, this is immediately distilled down to the most cynical reading imaginable. Alpha fucks, beta bucks.
Precisely. In manosphere circles, the DMSH is stripped of all nuance and presented as definitive proof of this adage. The beta buck side, the stable, resource-providing man, is necessary for security, while the alpha fuck side, the genetically superior or dominant male, is sought for reproductive viability. The hypothesis is presented as an absolute biological revelation, proving that female infidelity and hypergamy are hardwired and immutable.
And this moves the discussion immediately from a scientific model of adaptation to a moral condemnation of female behavior.
Exactly. That is the core issue, the wholesale obscuring of scientific nuance.
What are the specific rhetorical distortions that turn a scientific hypothesis into ideological dogma online?
There are three critical, consistent patterns of distortion. The first is converting a hypothesis to a fact. The scientific language terms like suggests, posits, or hypothesized is entirely removed. Speculations about the aggregate fitness behaviors of our Pleistocene ancestors are repackaged as generalized, deterministic statements about modern human behavior, often framed as absolute biological truth or undeniability. The complexity of cultural mediation is entirely ignored.
So they take a tentative conclusion about survival mechanisms from millions of years ago and use it as a fatalistic condemnation of how people behave today. What about the second distortion relating to the word strategy?
The second is the proximate ultimate confusion. In EP, the term strategy refers to ultimate unconscious fitness goals mechanisms operating at the level of natural selection. In online discourse, however, this term is conflated with conscious, proximate political or social actions.
Like what?
For example, a common claim is that feminism is merely a sexual strategy. This is a profound semantic trick. It takes a complex political, economic, and social movement, which is a proximate cause with conscious agency, and reduces it entirely to a simplistic, unconscious reproductive drive, which is an ultimate cause related to evolutionary fitness. It denies the complexity and conscious agency involved in modern social change.
By reducing political action to mere biology, they dismiss the entire field of sociology and political science.
Exactly. And the third distortion is the application of an explicit sexual double standard. This evolutionary reasoning is applied almost exclusively to scrutinize, explain, and morally judge female behavior, their perceived infidelity, their mate selection criteria, their agency. This often leads to scathing negative judgments, like reducing women to brainless primates or slaves to their biology.
But the theory of evolution and EP also extensively cover the evolutionary underpinnings of male short-term mating propensities and reproductive selfishness. Are those discussed with the same moral scrutiny?
Almost never. The extensive EP research into male risk-taking, resource hoarding, and short-term mating behavior, all evolutionarily justifiable mechanisms, are rarely, if ever, discussed in these circles with the same negative moral framing. This biased, one-sided application of evolutionary principles reinforces the age-old sexual double standard under the guise of scientific objectivity.
This all suggests a profound ideological division in how people use the same data. Let's finish by reiterating the central difference in locus of control between the strategic SRP and the fatalistic black-pilled worldview, which often relies on this same distorted EP data.
The difference is defined entirely by the perception of personal agency. The SRP, or soft red pill, actively chooses monk mode, a deliberate strategic pivot to build an internal locus of control and take self-directed action to accumulate confidence. They use the reality of the harsh environment as fuel for improvement.
Whereas the black-pilled worldview...
Conversely, the black-pilled worldview, while using the same EP information about biological determinism, interprets it to mean their destiny is entirely determined by uncontrollable genetic and evolutionary forces, an external locus of control. This interpretation leads directly to fatalism, despair, and nihilism, because they believe effort is ultimately futile against the immutable laws of biology.
So one uses the harsh reality to justify the start of an intense campaign of self-improvement. The other uses it to justify giving up because the odds are fixed.
We started this deep dive with the story of the fisherman Mark, realizing the external market had become a trap and pivoting to become the sovereign of his own domain. This journey, analyzed through the lens of game theory, resource economics, and Stoic philosophy, reveals that the SRP is not merely an emotional reaction. It's an unflinching, amoral embrace of reality.
We've seen that the current social ecosystem is an autonomous environment where the high cost of voice-aggressive competition exceeds the benefits, making strategic withdrawal or exit the most rational path for the individual concerned with maintaining their crucial survival redundancy.
And the tactical execution of this pivot is monk mode, which utilizes rigorous Stoic principles like apatheia and cognitive distancing to forge an internal locus of control. This proactive isolation, focused entirely on building competence, stands in stark opposition to pathological forms of withdrawal like hikikomori, which are driven by fear of shame and arrested development.
So the ultimate lesson learned from the soft red pill's amoral logic is clear. You cannot change the game, which is fixed and autonomous, but you can and must expend every unit of energy to remake your personal sovereignty.
That systematic buildup across financial, physiological, and psychological domains is what grants the individual anti-fragility, allowing them to actively benefit from the market volatility that crushes the unprepared.
The movement channels competence, resilience, and sovereignty, prioritizing the self and long-term functional integrity over fleeting external validation and immediate comfort.
And when aggregated, this individual retreat creates a powerful, soft decoupling, a nonviolent functional insulation from a system perceived as exploitative.
The strategic withdrawal and the vigorous pursuit of monk mode is viewed as the only viable hedge against a future of extreme social instability. The true strongman does not need to win within a rigged game. He has long ceased to play.